Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. And ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you for what it teaches us today. May we really take to heart the things that we look at today, that we might be able to speak with people knowledgeably about Israel in prophecy and thereby convince those who are truly seeking for the truth that the truth can be found in your word. And Lord, bless those who are here, bless those who are still coming. Lord, be with those who are away out of town, and Lord, just be with everyone. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so the Bible's prophecies are the greatest evidence for divine inspiration because the Bible's prophecies are different from any other kind of prophecy, and we're going to show that here in just a minute. The Bible's prophecies are clear. They're detailed. They're also unfailing, meaning they've all come to pass. Obviously, some prophecies are yet future, but all those that have been fulfilled, they were fulfilled when they were supposed to. They were fulfilled how they were prophesied to be fulfilled. So they were unfailing, but that is a great contrast to extra-biblical prophecies, which are typically vague and inaccurate. So let's look at this. The Sibyl prophetesses in the 4th century, they were sought after quite a bit in the Roman Empire for prophecy concerning different decisions that needed to be made and so on. And so when Maxentius consulted these prophetesses before meeting Constantine in the battle on the banks of the Tiber River, he was told, on that day, the enemy of Rome will perish. Well, that's kind of vague. On that day. So, in other words, whoever won, the other guy was the enemy of Rome. So if Maxentius had won, then Constantine would have been the enemy of Rome. But Constantine did win, therefore Maxentius was the enemy of Rome. So their prophecy, it wasn't detailed, it wasn't clear, and it wasn't specific. It was vague. And so it could apply any which way. Consider the prophecies of Nostradamus. If you remember, I can remember when I was young, standing in line at the grocery store with my mother and looking at the tabloids. Prophecies of Nostradamus for whatever year it was. Really? And it was always just a bunch of hoopla to sell their paper. But his prophecies were cryptic and they were obscure. Well, if they're cryptic and obscure, that means that figuring out what he's talking about is difficult. And apply, this means this and this means this. That's going to be pretty hard to do. So let's look at this. Here's a prophecy that allegedly describes Hitler. Now, when we read this, you think about it, and you figure if you can see, I see Hitler in that. Just anyway, here's what it says: beast ferocious from hunger will swim across rivers. The greater part of the region will be against the hister. The great one will cause it to be dragged in an iron cage, when the German child will observe nothing. Do you see Hitler in that? No. That makes no sense, really, when you look at it. It's so vague. It's like what people say nowadays. This is what you call a word salad. All the words are there. Just when you're done, it doesn't mean anything. It's sort of nonsense. So that's Nostradamus. And again, compared to Bible prophecy, not even the same. Let's look at astrology. The forecasts of astrology are usually very vague. It's something like, some friends may have a feeling you have been ignoring them. It's like, may or are. I mean, what are the stars saying? Are they saying that they are or they're not? They may. And so, and even when the astrological prophecies are more precise, they're usually wrong. For example, two famous astrologers in Britain predicted that Hitler would never start World War II. For example, Edward Lindo. I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight. We know whether that prophecy is true or not. We know what happened. Edward Lindo said, "The Nazis attacking Britain? Don't make me laugh. Not a sign in my charts." He said that June 25th, 1939. The battle for Britain started not that long after that. It was just actually within a year. And so the bombings of London and all that. So he was very shortly proven to be mistaken. Then there's Jean Dixon. She's another famous medium, I suppose. She prophesied that the Soviets would beat the U.S. to the moon. Didn't work, unless you believe that the U.S. didn't make it to the moon, and then maybe the Soviets did. Anyway, she also prophesied that World War III would begin in 1958. Okay, I don't think that happened. She also said that a cure would be found for cancer in 1967. Well, that would have been nice. That would have been real nice. But wrong. Edgar Casey prophesied that China would be converted to Christianity in 1968. Well, here we are all these many years later, still not. He also claimed that Armageddon would occur in 1999. No, didn't happen. James was born. That's about the closest to Armageddon that happened in 1999. Anyway, let's look at Islamic prophecy. And this following prophecy refers to the Dajjal, which is what the Muslims call their Messiah, the one they're looking for. The Dajjal will come forth having with him water and fire, and what mankind see as water will be fire which burns, and what they see as fire will be cold, sweet water. Well, that's not clear, and anyway. So then, let's go on. Let's look at Hindu prophecy. So none of these compare to Bible prophecy. They don't compare to the clarity, the specifics of Bible prophecy at all. But let's look at Hindu prophecy. Maybe they'll be different. This prophecy we're going to read talks about the age of Kali. The age of Kali is supposed to be a 10,000 year golden age, which will be filled with extreme hardships for people with ideals and values. To me, if it's, extreme hardships for people with ideals and values, it's not a golden age. You see what I'm saying? That seems contradictory. But let's read the prophecy. It says, when deceit, falsehood, lethargy, sleepiness, violence, despondency, grief, delusion, fear, and poverty prevail, that is the Kali Yuga, the age of Kali. But that's so vague, it could describe any time period since the fall of man. Any time, any place, all over the world. So the Bible prophecy, on the other hand, in its clarity and in its detail, has never failed. For example, prophecies concerning Christ's first coming describe the exact time of his coming. If you read through Daniel chapter 9, it talks about the 70 weeks, and it begins from the command going forth to rebuild Jerusalem. So that's the time of Cyrus, king of Persia. From that time, it counts forward to the time that the temple, the walls would be rebuilt. It counts forward all the way to the time when Christ would be crucified. You can count it up. And so you can figure pretty well exactly the year that Christ died on the cross. from Daniel chapter 9, from that prophecy. And so you have the time of his coming, the exact place of his birth. We know Micah tells us that it's in Bethlehem. The piercing of his hands and feet on the cross, Psalm 22 tells us that. The words that he spoke from the cross, there are several psalms that bring those forward. Also, the soldiers gambling for Jesus' clothes, his burial in a rich man's tomb, and I mean, so many other details. All of those details are part of Bible prophecy. And so, compared to all these other prophecies, and these people are venerated, astrologists. I mean, it used to be back in the day when newspapers were a thing. I mean, we still have newspaper, but it's not like it used to be. But back when newspapers used to be a thing, there were people that as soon as they got their paper, first thing they do is open it up to the page where the astrology was so they could see what, well, I'm going to call in sick to work because my astrology. There were people that were literally that way. They gave it credence as if it was all true. And yet, again, it's so vague. And then they want to downplay prophecy of the Bible as if, oh, well, that's not true. No, that's all made up. How can it be made up? You had better know your stuff and know it well if you're going to be specific in giving your prophecy. And so God, in giving his prophecy, he gave details, which means either God is a fool or he knows what he's talking about. And of course, the fact that the prophecy, as far as the coming of Christ, was fulfilled exactly like it was prophesied, that tells us God knows what he's talking about. God's no fool. And so then the prophecies about Israel are equally precise. There are all sorts of things, prophecies about Israel. We're not even going to deal with all of them, but we're going to cover some of them. Even before the nation of Israel entered into the promised land, Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy, before he died, he gave an overview. This is what's going to happen. And it happened just like he said. If you go through Joshua, Judges, into 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then you compare that to this, it's like, even beyond Ezra and Nehemiah, you can see it. You can see it laid out exactly as God said. So here in Deuteronomy 28, and verse number 25, the Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies, and thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. The Lord will smite thee with the botch of Egypt, and with the emerods, with the scab, and with the itch, whereof thou canst not be healed. The Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness. And thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore. No man shall save thee. Thou shalt betroth a wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build an house, and thou shalt not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shalt not gather the grapes thereof. Thine ox shall be slain before thine eyes, and thou shalt not eat thereof. Thine ass shall be violently taken away from before thy face, and shall not be restored to thee. Thy sheep shall be given unto thine enemies, and thou shalt have none to rescue them. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people, and thine eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all the day long, and there shall be no might in thine hand. If you look at verses 36 and 37, and the Lord shall bring thee and thy king, which thou shalt set over thee, unto a nation which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, and there shalt thou serve other gods, wood and stone, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. And verses 63 and so on, it says, and it shall come to pass that as the Lord rejoiced over you to do good and to multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you to destroy you and to bring you to naught. and ye shall be plucked from off the land whither thou goest to possess it. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. And there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. And among these nations shalt thou find no ease, neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and sorrow of mind. I'm going to stop there. But that's absolutely true. That's how they were. They were despised. They were hated. They were mistreated. We're going to see a whole lot more. But the thing is, this prophecy was written about 1450 BC, so almost 3,500 years ago. So you say, well, that's a long time ago. It was. But you know, the prophecy, it talks about defeat at the hands of foreign powers. It talks about Israel being evicted from the promised land. It talks about them being dispersed to the ends of the earth. And then it talks about her return in the end of days. And again, we'll talk about that more. So even though this prophecy concerning Israel, they weren't even in the promised land, and already there's a prophecy that they're going to be disobedient and be taken out of that promised land. Well, that's, who wants to hear that? Oh, hey, go forth and conquer. By the way, later on down the road, you're going to be hauled off, and you're going to be essentially in captivity and in slavery because you've disobeyed God. I mean, nobody wants to hear that. But what I'm pointing out is the specifics, the detail that God gave hundreds and actually thousands of years before it came to pass. And it came to pass exactly like God said. Now, let's look at some very specific things. Because looking at that, we're going to look here in Deuteronomy 28 and 29 here. In some other places as well. But let's talk about the desertification of the land. Not that the land of Israel was turned into a giant banana split. Not that kind of desert, but a desert. So the whole land was turned into a desert. Here's what Moses said in Deuteronomy 28, verse 23 and 24. He said, the rain would be powder and dust. Have you ever been in a really, really dry area where, desert or semi-desert, and when it rains, when the rain hits the ground, dust comes up? Have you ever? That's the weirdest thing when that happens. One thing that we have in Lubbock, which I'm not bragging, this is just fact, but one thing we have falling mud, because the wind blows, and of course it picks up all the dust, because we're not desert, but we're heading that way. And so, especially in the spring when they start plowing the cotton fields, the wind blows and the skies turn brown. Seriously, the skies are brown. And then it rains, and after it rains, everything the rain has touched is covered in mud. It's just nasty, absolutely sickening. Well, that is kind of what God is prophesying through Moses about the land of Israel, that because of their disobedience, it would be dry, it would be dusty, and even when it rained, that's not going to help it. It's not going to change the vegetation. It's not going to green up. It's just going to, what happens when it rains in a dry area, right? We were down in Arizona several years ago, and we were staying there, and where we were staying, there were no roads to speak of. Now, my GPS said there was, but seriously, you are driving on the packed sand. That's what you're driving on. And there happened to be, you got off the road of a kilometer or two, off the paved road, and there was a church back in there. And so anyway, we were staying there at that church, and it rained. And it rained hard. Oh man, this is great. But you know what? After it rained in the morning, and then the sun came out, and that afternoon, you couldn't tell. It had even rained. It was so dry and dusty, and that's just how it was. That is what Moses is saying the promised land would become. Let's read this, Deuteronomy 28, verses 23 and 24. And thy heaven that is over thy head shall be brass, and the earth that is under thee shall be iron. The Lord shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven shall it come down upon thee until thou be destroyed. So what is he saying? He's saying your land's going to be a desert. It's going to turn into a desert. Look over in chapter 29, Deuteronomy 29, and verse 23. Here it says, and that the whole land thereof is brimstone and salt and burning, that it is not sown, nor beareth, nor any grass growth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboam, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and in his wrath. So the land would become brimstone, salt, and burning. Again, if you're out, and I mean, you can even go down to the beach and do this, but you get on the sandy beach where the sun has been beating down, and, take off your sandals and try and go barefoot in the sand. It hurts. Because, then you really want to go into the water, because it hurts being there on the sand. It's too hot. The sand, that's what he's saying. It's going to be a desert. It's going to be hot. It's going to be dusty. It's going to be dry. Nothing's going to grow. Now, what we need to consider is, what was the land like when Moses said this? Because we know what the land's like now. I mean, you can Google it. You can see pictures, and some of us know people that have been to the land of Israel, so, they tell us what it's like. But let's see what it was. Back in Genesis chapter 13, verse number 10, this is in Moses' day, over 400 years previous. The plain of Jordan in southern Israel was well watered everywhere, even as the garden of God. Genesis 13, verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So that's what it was like. It was green. It was lush. It was, we know. We can picture that, what it was like. Even when you get into Leviticus chapter 20, here, Israel, they're going to spy out the land. What kind of a land is it? Is it a good land that God's said he's going to take us into? Is it a bad place? Let's see what it's like. And here's how they describe it in Leviticus 20 and verse number 24. But I've said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, which have separated you from other people. Well, again, is he speaking literally? Was there like a river there that was all milk? Was there another river that was all honey? Is that what he's saying? No, he's saying it's a lush land. Now, look, if there's honey, it has to be green. There has to be flowers somewhere. Otherwise, we're not going to go back to, Science 101. But we all understand how that works. Yes, you have bees, but you've got to have the flowers. You have to have the vegetation to provide what the bees need to make the honey. Same thing, if you're going to have milk, you can't have desert. You got to have some grass somewhere for the cows or the goats, wherever you're getting the milk from, even the camels, whatever. You got to have something for them to eat. And so it's got to be a lush green area. Also, if we go over to Numbers 32 and verse number 1, we see that the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh, they actually stayed on the east side of the Jordan because the land was so good. It was such a great place. In Numbers 32, verse 1, now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of cattle, and when they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, that behold, the place was a place for cattle. Well, what does that mean, it's a place for cattle? He just got some grass growing somewhere. I'm from Texas. I don't know what cattle like. You get out to way West Texas, out El Paso and that area, you don't find near as many cattle. You know why? It's too much like desert out there. To be honest, it's such a unique place because You drive down the road, and the houses on either side of the street, they don't have a yard. I mean, they don't have grass in their yard. It's not landscape. It's rock or gravel that they have. And actually, they get a tax break for taking out the grass and putting in the rock because they don't have to use the water. So there's not a ton of cattle there. So for Reuben and Gad to say, oh, this is a place for cattle, there's not some desert place. It's not some dry place. This is a place that enjoys its rain. It's green. It's got probably knee-high grass, all that sort of thing that, drives us nuts. Somebody needs to go mow that down because, that's going to breed, mosquitoes, which it will. So let's talk about the condition of the land now. So that's how it's described, but that's not how it is. Now, this land where Reuben and Gad were looking at, that actually is part of the modern nation of Jordan. It's on the east side of the Jordan River. So it's not part of the nation of Israel today. It's on the east side of Jordan, part of the modern nation of Jordan, and it is harsh desert today. You don't raise cattle there. It's desert. It doesn't rain. Obviously, it wasn't desert then, but because of Israel's sin and idolatry, God stopped the rains. God said, I'm going to judge you. The land's going to turn into desert. That's what we read. And so what do we find? Number one, what God said is going to happen, happened. It became a desert. Then crops can be grown in most parts of Israel, but only through irrigation. And actually, that's one of the modern marvels, is the nation of Israel today, how that they have beautified the nation, and they've really been able to grow all sorts of things, but it's only because of irrigation. It's not because of rain. And in fact, God describes that. He says, when you were in Egypt, you could only have an herb garden, and you had to water it with your foot. Now, that doesn't make sense to us. What do you mean water it with your foot? Am I going to stub my toe and my toes are going to cry? And what are you talking about? But that is the contraption, just to use that term, that they had in Egypt for getting water out of the Nile and to irrigate their crops on either side of the river. They used their foot. So they'd take their foot off, it'd drop down. It's just sort of a lever. And then they push it down with their foot, and it would raise up the bucket or whatever it was with water, and they dump it off, and that's how they did it. But God said, you're not going to have to do that in the promised land because it rains, because of the rain of heaven. And so, again, that's describing the way it was. That's not how it is today. Yes, they can grow a lot of things, but it's all because of irrigation. It's not because of natural processes of rain and so on. So there's a difference. Israel's land is a powerful witness of the accuracy of ancient Bible prophecy. How could God know way back then? Because God is. God is. He inhabits eternity, the Bible says. It's not that he will. And I know this is beyond us, because we are finite. We know time and space. But God is, and he inhabits eternity. That means he's already there in the future. But he's still in the past. That doesn't make sense to us at all. It's like, okay, don't start down that road. It's 3:00 in the afternoon and my brain's not ready for that, that kind of thing. But that's true. How did God know? Because God is. And God knew that's what he would do. He knew that's what Israel would do. And he prophesied it that way. And guess what? That's what happened. And so we see the land of Israel today just exactly like he said it would be. Then let's go on and let's talk about the dispersion and persecution. Now we know about the dispersion. Let's look at the prophecy back here in Deuteronomy 28. And we're not going to read all of this that it has here. But verse 64, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. So there's the prophecy. And what Moses prophesied is that Israel would be plucked from off the land. Now, you know that word plucked, we don't use that except when we're talking about, getting a chicken ready to fry. We pluck a bird, but it really, when we do, it gives me at least an image of, like, for example, my boys when they were younger, if they're trying to walk out into traffic or something like that, then you pluck them up, which means you just sort of grab them and you just jerk them out of the way. Not that you're trying to be mean and not that you're trying to be abusive at all, but it's just sort of a sudden action. And that's what he said. I'm going to pluck you up out of the land. It's like one day you're going to be there and the next day you're going to be walking out. And that's really kind of how it worked, if you read the scripture. But anyway, he goes on to say that they be scattered among all people from the one end of the earth even to the other. We read that. And that there they would find no ease. We read that in verse 65. Neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee a trembling heart and failing of eyes. So this is what the prophecy was. You're going into captivity. And it's not just, oh, hey, I want you to move. It's you're being moved by force, and you never know day to day what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be good. You don't know if it's going to be bad. You don't know if people are going to treat you right. You don't know what's going to happen. And so that's what's prophesied. So let's talk about the fulfillment. Was it fulfilled that way? Oh, we're going to see a whole bunch of stuff that, yes, absolutely was fulfilled, just like God said. The prophecy began to be fulfilled at the destruction of Israel's first temple and her 70-year captivity in Babylon in about 586 BC, but that was only the beginning. Moses said that the prophecy would be fulfilled in the latter days, and that's what he says in chapter 31 and verse number 29. He says, "For I know that after my death you will utterly corrupt yourselves and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands." Now, the latter days didn't begin until the coming of Christ, the first coming. So the latter days, the last days, started with the advent of Christ. So that means while you see fulfillment in the captivity of Babylon, you see fulfillment in the destruction of Jerusalem that we'll talk about in a minute, yet there's more. There's more. And again, so let's go on. So in 70 AD, Israel's second temple was destroyed by the Roman armies. 65 years later, Jerusalem was razed. I mean, that means it was leveled. And after Rome put down the revolt there, the pagan city was built on the site, dedicated to Jupiter. Emperor Hadrian changed Judea's name to Syria Palestina, and multitudes of Jews were slaughtered. Most of the rest were carried away captive, or they fled to other parts of the world just to escape, to survive. For 1900 years, Israel has been dispersed, and she's been persecuted and tormented wherever she wandered. Now, that's what he says here in Deuteronomy 28. You're going to be persecuted. You're going to be hated. You're going to be in fear of your life the whole time. Now listen to this. She's been hated by the Romans, obviously, by the Greeks, by the Muslims, by the Roman Catholic Church, by the Byzantines, by the Orthodox churches, by the Spanish. The Jews were evicted from Spain in 1492. They were hated by the Venetians. Jews were forced to live in the ghetto in Venice. The English hated the Jews. They expelled the Jews from England in 1290. Then the Russians hated the Jews. They expelled the Jews in the 1880s. The Germans, obviously, we know about. early Lutherans, many others. Anti-Semitism, as we well know, is on the rise today. It is well on the rise today. And we have to be on guard for that we don't get sucked up into that. But nonetheless, all of that is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy. All of that. And then, of course, we can talk about the Holocaust. That's, again, a fulfillment of the prophecy there in Deuteronomy 28. The Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem witnesses to the bitter sorrow that Israel experienced at the hands of the Germans. There are 9 galleries in the main museum that are devoted to different chapters of the Holocaust, from the rise of Hitler to his death. There are hundreds of disturbing photos and artifacts, and they testify to arrests that were made in the middle of the night, destroyed synagogues, Jews marked with armbands bearing the Star of David, Jews mocked, beaten, spit on, burned, shot, poisoned, heaps of corpses, frightened children, pathetic faces peering out of cattle cars, starved men. All of these things happened. And I know because of the anti-Semitic nature of our day, all of this is being called into question. There are many people who are people in authority, either in their government or whatever, who are now saying, no, the Holocaust never happened. And to me, I say, what? Are you kidding? My granddad served in the U.S. military in World War II, and he was part of the Corps of Engineers. They were the ones who had to build bridges across the rivers. So they had to go there. I mean, there was no bridge to capture. So the enemy's on the other bank shooting at them, trying to keep them from building the bridge. This is the sort of stuff that was going on. So what I'm saying is, he was on the very front lines, and they had the fortune of being able to liberate some of these camps. And he had nothing good to say about it, about the camps. They were horrible, horrible places. And so these people nowadays saying, oh, that never happened, that's just Jewish propaganda to make us feel sorry for them and so on and so forth. And no, it is the fulfillment of prophecy. It is. But it's true. It actually happened. So even though all of these things happened, even though they were expelled from, as we talked about, Spain, from Venice, from England, from Russia, and so on, even though they were hated, yet they still remained a distinct people group. You think about that. For 2,000 years nearly, they had no homeland. They had no place they could go and say, this is the nation for the Jews. They couldn't do that. And yet, they retained their identity as Jews. That is also a fulfillment of prophecy. What other people groups can say that after thousands of years of having no homeland, still say, yeah, we're a distinct people group? It doesn't happen. What happens is they get absorbed by whatever the main dominant people group is. They're just absorbed, and their history ends. But not with the Jews, because God's not done with them yet. But look at these quotes. In 1754, Bishop Thomas Newton wrote of the Jews, their preservation is really one of the most illustrious acts of divine providence. They are dispersed among all nations, yet not confounded with any. In other words, they're not, in saying that they're not confounded with any other nation, they're not thought to be a part of that other nation. They're still thought to be unique and separate. They go on to say they produce their degree or their pedigree from the beginning of the world. That's one thing that's big with the Jews, is their genealogy. That is huge with them. And so they can trace their heritage all the way back to Abraham. And of course, from Abraham, they can trace all the way back to Adam. And so they can go all the way back to the beginning of the world. Can you? I mean, you can go on Ancestry.com and you can go back to a certain point, and then all of a sudden what happens? There just aren't any records. Nobody knows because, somebody came in and burned down all the churches that had records, or the libraries that had records. Something like that happened at some point in time. And so all the records are gone, but not the Jew. They can trace themselves all the way back. And they have done that ever since the beginning. It's an amazing thing. So he goes on to say, after wars, massacres, and persecutions, they still subsist. That was in 1754 he's saying that. How much more? I mean, we're 270 years beyond that. How much more could we say? What an amazing thing that is, that they still subsist. They're still quite numerous. But what? But a supernatural power could have preserved them in such a manner as no other nation on earth has been preserved. That testifies to the reality and the truth of Almighty God. And of course, the prophecy concerning Israel, it's just borne out in all of this. Walter Scott wrote, the once mighty monarchies of Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome have risen, flourished, and fallen, leaving no permanent results behind. Now, you say, well, wait a minute. The Roman Empire, there's still Roman roads, and some of those Roman roads still being used. A friend of mine was a missionary in Romania for many years, and he said some of the roads they have there are the old Roman roads. And that's what because it's either that or a mud 2-track. And so the Roman roads are in better shape, and you can actually get there. And so that's what they still use them today. To me, that boggles the mind. But are there people that you say, oh, those are Romans? Say, oh yeah, the Italians. But the Italians aren't the same as the Romans. They're not. And so do you have them as a people group? No, they've been sort of blended in with all the other Italians, right? And the same thing with the Greeks. They had a once mighty number of kingdoms with Athens, with Sparta, and then Macedonia, and so on. Then you had the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. And again, that's just amazing seeing what all happened in such a short time under Alexander's rule. What an amazing thing. And what do you have today? Do you have there's a country called Greece, but that was made up out of whole cloth when the Ottoman Empire was falling apart. It's not the same, is it? Ethnically speaking, they're not the same. Their culture is different than what it was way back when. The Jews' culture, they still follow the Passover. They still follow the law. They still follow the bar mitzvah. They still follow the law of circumcision. They still follow all of those things that they have done for thousands of years. It hasn't changed. You can't say that with the Greeks at all. The once mighty nation now is bankrupt. Standing around waiting for the EU to give them a handout so that they can survive. What a sorry, Alexander would roll over in his grave if he saw what they were. So, no, you're Greek, stand up. But they're not that anymore. That's gone. All of that is gone. And same thing with the others that we talked about. There's not that permanent thing left behind that is still here, still continuing on. It's gone. The Jews, on the other hand, whose reliable history goes further back than any of these ancient kingdoms, are with us today. In physiognomy, I won't say that again, and national characteristics, the Jew is unchanged in a history of nigh 4,000 years. The Jews as a people cannot be destroyed. Time has proven that to be the case. The Jews cannot be destroyed. God is their keeper and preserver, even while under his governmental judgment as they are today. The Jews, without a home, without a country, without a government, without a head, are yet a people as distinct from the Gentiles in national faith, feeling, and hope as in the days of David and Solomon. And he wrote that back in 1910. Still true today, 110 years later. Still true. The fact that they are what they are. You know, they're not just, I'm ethnically a Jew. They're not. They have a whole culture all their own. Even though, they come to Canada or they come to the United States or whatever country they come into, and they do embrace that country to which they move, yet they never lose their individuality as Jews. That testifies to the reality and the truth of God's prophecy concerning the Jews. Well, what does that mean then? If he prophesied this concerning Israel some 4,500 years ago, or 3,500 years ago, sorry, and it's true today, then what conclusion do we come to? That we can trust the Bible. Because, look, as far as none of us are Jews today, so the Bible prophecy concerning Israel, that doesn't relate to us at all. But the fact that God fulfilled every prophecy concerning Israel so far exactly as he said it, that tells us we can trust what God says about everything. Because if he is exactly fulfilling what doesn't pertain to me, he's going to exactly fulfill what does pertain to me. And so, again, it's important for us to look at these things, to understand these things, so that we are able to convey them. Because you have people, the Bible is just, a book full of myths. Really? How mythical is it when it talks about Israel and that has been fulfilled to the letter? How is that then just a book of myths? How is it just stories? It's just, old people's ideas from way back when. No, it's a book from God, revealing his heart and his mind for us. And so, again, as we're trying to be a testimony and a witness to the lost, and they bring up, the Bible is just myth, then run here. This is so easily proven. Run to Deuteronomy 28, read those verses that we looked at, and say, look, where are we today? Exactly what it says there. That was written how long ago? 3,500 years ago. Moses could not have known that on his own. It wasn't just myth. It wasn't just man's idea. This is the inspiration of God. In other words, this is God's words. Proven by prophecy. Proven by Israel in prophecy. We're going to stop here.